Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that Jacob Hawthorne was forced to end his investigation under abrupt and questionable circumstances. It wasn't his decision. The order came directly from Elon Hawthorne, his older brother, and the man currently holding the reins of the police department with an iron grip. To the public, Elon framed it as a necessary move, citing concerns about Jacob's mental state and a potential conflict of interest surrounding the death of Kenny Delgado. But within the walls of the precinct, whispers grew louder. Jacob was being silenced, and Elon wasn't acting alone. Marcel Malone, a political strategist and longtime associate of Elon, had been seen meeting with the chief on several occasions prior to the announcement. Marcel had no official position in law enforcement, but his influence stretched deep. His presence was always a red flag to Jacob. It was Marcel who first suggested that Jacob might have compromised the Delgado case. And it was likely Marcel who convinced Elon that removing Jacob would eliminate a liability one with far too many questions and far too much tenacity to back down. Jacob, blindsided and betrayed, spiraled. The investigation had been personal for him. Kenny wasn't just another case file. He had been an informant. Someone Jacob had worked with off the Buxa Street kid turned intelligence asset who had uncovered threads leading to something much larger than anyone in the department wanted to admit. Kenny had died under mysterious circumstances 2 weeks after telling Jacob that a new player was pulling strings in the city's underworld. His body had been found in a burned-out warehouse, and the official report called it an overdose. Jacob knew better. When he confronted Elon behind closed doors, what he received wasn't reassurance, but condemnation. Elon accused him of misconduct. He implied that Jacob had blurred the line between officer and vigilante. And then he said it outright: Jacob was too close to the case. He was compromised. Jacob pushed back. He cited evidence, flagged inconsistencies in Kenny's autopsy, raised concerns about forged lab results. But Elon remained unmoved. He gave Jacob a choice: step away voluntarily or be suspended pending investigation. The unspoken message was clear: step away or be destroyed. Jacob walked out without saying a word. But later that night, he returned to his locker, took his badge and gun, and placed them on Elon's desk. No ceremony. No goodbyes. Just a quiet end to a career built on integrity. But Jacob wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. In the weeks that followed, Jacob tried to fade into civilian life. He worked part-time at a local hardware store and took night shifts as a security guard. But the shadows of what he left behind kept pulling him back. He started going over his old notes, his voice recordings with Kenny, files he had copied from the precinct database before he turned in his credentials. What he found sent him deeper into a vortex of corruption, backroom dealings, and institutional rot. Marcel Malone wasn't just advising alone, was bankrolling a series of real estate acquisitions through shell companies tied to seized properties from past drug busts. Properties Jacob himself had helped confiscate. They were being flipped for millions under a legal provision meant to redistribute community assets. The profits were funneled into political campaigns, nonprofit facades, and ghost accounts that could never be traced directly to either man. But the connections were there, hidden in the details. Jacob had no badge now, but he had truth. And he had fury. He started documenting everything. Sleepless nights turned into long digital trails. He hacked into private communications, downloaded surveillance feeds from city archives, and traced ownership records across state lines. His skills hadn't dulled. If anything, he was sharper, no one bound by the rules, fueled by betrayal. It didn't take long for Elon and Marcel to notice. They put watchers on him. Jacob spotted a tail outside his apartment, noticed his mail had been tampered with. One night, his car was broken into and wiped clean. No fingerprints. No message. Just silencia warning. Jacob reached out to the one person he thought he could still trust, Detective Lena Maris. They had been partners once. Lena had taken a promotion and was now working internal affairs. When they met, her eyes were tired, heavy with caution. She told Jacob she couldn't help. Not openly. But she handed him a file. It contained personnel records, sealed complaints, and anonymous tips about misconduct involving Elon dating back over a decade. Most had been dismissed quietly. Others had simply disappeared. Jacob asked why she was giving him this. Lena looked at him for a long time and said, "Because you were always the only one who gave a damn about the right thing." That night, Jacob started building a case. Not for court, not for the system that had failed him, but for the public. He began assembling a video series. Each episode covered a different piece of the conspiracy. He used voice modulation, blurred his face, and uploaded through secure VPNs to underground forums and encrypted news sites. The series was called The Blue Veil. It exploded. Within days, the first video racked up tens of thousands of views. Anonymous tips flooded in. People who had once stayed silent now found a voice in the chaos. Jacob's second episode implicated Marcel in the disappearance of a public housing whistleblower. The third exposed a secret task force run by Elon that had operated without city oversight, conducting raids and seizures under the guise of community policing. By the fourth video, the city erupted. Protests flared. The mayor was forced to comment publicly. Elon denied everything. Marcel vanished from the public eye. But behind the scenes, the pressure mounted. Legal inquiries were launched. Journalists began circling. What had started as a smear campaign became a citywide reckoning. Still, Jacob wasn't safe. Someone broke into his apartment. This time, they left a message. Scrawled across his bathroom mirror in red ink were the words, "Stop or end up like him." Jacob knew who him was. Kenny. But fear no longer had a place in him. He reached out to an old friend at a national investigative outlet. They arranged a meeting in a nearby city. The night before he left, Jacob recorded a final message. A contingency. If he didn't make it to the meeting, it would go live. He did make it. Barely. The contact handed him a portable drive and told him the outlet would run a special feature. The world would finally see what had been hidden for too long. But the fight wasn't over. Jacob returned to the city with a new mission, not just to expose Elon and Marcel, but to dismantle the system that had allowed them to thrive. No badge. No authority. Just the truth and the scars to prove it. He knew it would cost him everything. But he also knew something deeper. He had already lost the one thing he thought mattered most: his identity as a cop. What he found in its place was something far more powerful. Purpose. And that was just the beginning. Jacob didn't sleep the night the story broke. National media outlets seized the evidence he delivered and ran the story across every major platform. Elon Hawthorne's face was plastered across cable news, framed by the chilling headlines of systemic corruption, falsified raids, and targeted cover-ups. Marcel Malone, once known as a behind-the-scenes tactician, was now a fugitive of interest. His properties were raided and his associates subpoenaed. But Jacob knew better than to celebrate. These men hadn't built their careers on luck. They had built them on leverage. And leverage always came with contingency. 2 days later, the retaliation began. A fabricated drug bust was reported at Jacob's old apartment. Anonymous reports claimed illegal substances had been found in the ventilation ducts. His name resurfaced in connection to old cases, suggesting tampered evidence and potential coercion of witnesses. Jacob was summoned for questioning not by the local precinct, but by an external task force allegedly investigating internal misconduct. He arrived with his documentation and recordings, but it was clear from the moment he stepped inside that the room was hostile. The questions were aggressive, circular. They questioned his mental health, implied he might be seeking revenge. He was held for 12 hours without formal charges. When he was released, his apartment had been broken into again. This time, everything was gone. Laptop, files, backup drives. Even his personal journals. Erased. But Jacob had learned from the best. The most sensitive materials had been duplicated and stored offsite. He had passed key intel to 3 separate sources: a tech journalist, a community leader, and an ex-cybercrime analyst. If anything happened to him, the material would be released in full. Still, Jacob realized he needed to vanish. He reached out to a contact in a neighboring state and relocated to a safe house, a quiet, decaying cabin once used as a scout station. There, he began rebuilding. For the first time, he wasn't focused on the fallout of his revelations, but on the bigger machine that Elon and Marcel had used to operate unchecked for years. Buried in the financial records he'd recovered were documents linking Marcel Malone to a larger network of political manipulation, a consultancy ring that helped elect judges, control zoning boards, and funnel money through fake nonprofits. Elon wasn't just protecting Marcel. He was a product of the machine, bred and chosen for his role. The deeper Jacob dug, the more he found connections leading outside the city. One name appeared repeatedly, a mysterious figure labeled only as ND referenced in encrypted memos and donor logs. ND had authorized legal frameworks for property seizures, campaign contributions, and even grants to the department's community outreach initiative, the same program Jacob once helped pioneer. Lena Maris resurfaced then. She had been suspended from internal affairs after anonymous complaints surfaced questioning her conduct. With nothing to lose, she tracked Jacob down. She came with more than sympathy. She brought a stolen hard drive from an evidence locker. It contained recordings from Elon's private office, flagged during a routine security audit, but buried by a superior. One of the audio files was a call between Elon and Marcel discussing the plan to isolate Jacob after Kenny's death. Another captured Elon boasting about using internal investigations to clean house. Jacob and Lena knew it wasn't enough to go to the press again. The press had already done its job. What they needed now was legal pressure. Institutional collapse. They reached out to a class action firm known for tackling public corruption. The lawyers were cautious, but after reviewing the evidence, they agreed to take on the case. Within weeks, a lawsuit was filed, not just against Elon and Marcel, but against the city for systemic negligence. Dozens of citizens joined the suit, victims of false arrests, coerced evictions, and families whose homes had been taken and resold for profit. Public hearings began. Jacob was called to testify. He walked into the courthouse wearing a plain suit, carrying nothing but a copy of Kenny Delgado's case file. When asked why he continued despite everything, he looked directly at the city attorney and said, "Because you don't bury the truth. You dig it up. Even if it costs you everything." The hearings went on for months. Elon refused to appear. His legal team claimed persecution and accused Jacob of vendetta. Marcel, still in hiding, was rumored to be living offshore under a different name. But the damage was irreversible. More documents were leaked. More victims came forward. The department was dismantled from the top down. Federal oversight was enacted. Entire task forces were suspended. Jacob didn't return to policing. He declined the reinstatement offer that came after the hearing. Instead, he partnered with Lena to create an independent civilian watchdog group, a nonprofit dedicated to investigating abuses of power across departments, from local sheriffs to federal agencies. In the final chapters of the ordeal, Jacob visited Kenny Delgado's grave. He left his original badge there, tarnished and weathered, no longer a symbol of service, but of the silence he had refused to accept. He stood in the rain for hours, not saying a word. Some stories don't end with redemption. Some end with truth. And for Jacob Hawthorne, that was enough. 6 months later, Jacob found himself in a room he never thought he'd enter, Ogina Federal Hearing Chamber in D.C., this time not as a whistleblower or fugitive, but as a key witness in a criminal conspiracy case that spanned 5 states. Across the aisle sat representatives from multiple agencies, their faces pale, some already lawyered up, others too stunned to speak. The files Jacob had received in the anonymous envelope had cracked open decades of hidden dealings. N.D. wasn't a single person. It was a rotating identity used by an elite advisory council embedded deep in the infrastructure of law enforcement policy. The council, known only in buried memos as No Directive, had written internal policies that appeared independent but were in fact tied to private intelligence firms, defense contractors, and political consulting groups. Their real weapon wasn't just money, it was narrative control. By influencing crime statistics, pilot reform, grants, and procedural guidelines, they were able to rig outcomes, target demographics, and bury dissent from the inside. Jacob presented these findings with meticulous clarity, linking every data point with time-stamped memos, emails, and surveillance footage. He wasn't just revealing bad actors anymore, was exposing a structural strategy of institutional exploitation. The panel listened in stunned silence. And when it was over, the chairman of the committee, a senator known for his hardline stance on law enforcement, stood up, took off his glasses, and simply said, "We have failed the public." In the days that followed, "no directive" became a trending phrase across social media. Public pressure mounted. Independent watchdog organizations demanded immediate investigations, and several senior officials resigned before subpoenas could be issued. Jacob refused every interview request. He wasn't interested in being a celebrity. He was interested in being useful. Lena, meanwhile, became the face of internal resistance, publishing a memoir that chronicled her experiences from the inside out. Her testimony led to the resignation of 2 deputy chiefs and reforms in hiring and promotions within internal affairs. The book, titled The Silence Protocol, became required reading in several criminal justice programs. Back in his modest home office far from the spotlight, Jacob opened a new file, labeled only Phase 2. He had come into possession of a contact list from the original Node Directive Network. Not names, but code phrases. Alias markers. Shadow titles like Cleric, Relay, Magnetron. One stood out, Bellkeeper. Whoever Bellkeeper was, they had authorized the original operation that got Kenny Delgado killed. Jacob reached out to a trusted journalist, someone he had worked with before. Together, they began tracking funding trails, ghost contracts, and anonymized donor patterns. Each lead confirmed a grim reality: Bellkeeper was still active. And they had started laying the groundwork for a renewed urban management plan in 3 separate cities, cloaked behind public-private housing deals and community tech grants. But this time, Jacob wasn't walking in blind. The nonprofit watchdog he had co-founded had grown. It now included former prosecutors, cybersecurity engineers, and even a retired judge who quietly consulted on strategy. With their help, Jacob built a secure database to track live evidence, uploading each new connection with geotagging, access logs, and encrypted source records. No more lost files. No more isolated whistleblowers. Then, one night, Jacob received a call from a voice he didn't expect, Elon Hawthorne. The voice was tired, raspier than he remembered. Elon said he had seen the hearings. That he knew the walls were closing in on everyone who had once believed themselves untouchable. But more surprisingly, he didn't call to threaten Jacob. He called to offer him a name. Jacob recorded the call. Elon confessed that Bellkeeper wasn't just a strategist, they were a broker between corrupt elements in the public and private sectors, including high-level developers, contractors, and data firms. Elon claimed Bellkeeper had visited him once, in person, at a closed-door meeting meant to discuss data equity in law enforcement. What they really discussed was asset repurposing, arrests, fines, and surveillance to displace vulnerable communities for real estate profit. The name Elon gave Jacob wasn't on any of his files. It was a lobbyist. A clean one. Public-facing. Known for funding youth outreach centers and sponsoring criminal justice reform conferences. It was someone the public trusted. Jacob didn't hesitate. He verified the identity through 3 independent channels. The moment he had confirmation, he contacted the federal task force. Charges were drawn up. Warrants were issued. And then silence. The lobbyist vanished. A private jet listed under a shell company departed the night before the warrant was delivered. Destination unknown. The media caught wind, but the real outrage came from the public. For the first time in decades, the outrage wasn't performative. It was organized. Marches began across cities, peaceful but unignorable. They didn't chant Jacob's name. They chanted Kenny Delgado's. The legacy of the cover-up had become something larger than any one man. It was now a movement. In his final update to the task force, Jacob wrote, Justice was never about perfection. It was about the refusal to let rot go unspoken, to let good people be erased, and to let systems remain opaque. I refused. And I won't stop. A year after his first whistleblowing report, Jacob was honored at a private ceremony not by the city, but by a coalition of families affected by false convictions. A mother of a teenage boy wrongfully imprisoned gave him a folded note. It read, "Because of you, he's coming home." Jacob stood under the soft glow of a single hanging light, his expression unreadable. Not satisfied. Not proud. Just resolved. And for the first time, he smiled not because it was over, but because it had begun. A new chapter. A future built not on silence, but accountability. Not on vengeance, but vigilance. And above all, truth.